Hi, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to the webinar. It is Wednesday, December 2nd, 2015. Tonight, we're going to talk about transitions in general. This is the first time I've ever done this webinar where we're going to talk about transition to the next program, to an aftercare program, transition to home, and what makes young adult transitions a little bit different. So it's a combination of three webinars that I've done in the past. And of course, there's a lot of overlap in those areas, but I think there's value in combining them all in one spot. So let's talk about first with the idea of introduction. And you know, one thing I wanted to say is that you might be at a different transition, but I have people on the webinar that I imagine are transitioning home after aftercare, that are transitioning away to college, that are transitioning in a lot of ways. And so I think the overall principles, the overarching principles apply to a lot of us in many areas of our life. And I always think about, when I think about people asking about transition, that we're often always in transition. So let's talk about the highs and lows. I think one thing for me that I talk to parents about is to try to find a place where the highs aren't that high and the lows aren't that low. And I'm not talking about trying to skim off your pain and your sadness so that, and also skimming off your happiness. I'm saying our evaluation of a situation, right? When something happens, we make so much meaning out of it, like it's the greatest moment in the world. My son just got a job. My daughter, you got good grades this semester. And my response is, that's fine. And let's be curious. Let's be open. Let's keep watching. And I think it's dangerous to assume that a given moment, a given success means that we're cured and everything is resolved, as it is to think that a setback, a relapse, a period or time of regression means that everything is horrible. If we can learn to take a step back, if we can learn not to respond from a trauma place, right? A place where we get triggered to have dramatic and polarizing feelings, I think we can better respond to situations instead of react to situations. So as we think about transitions, think about that idea of trying to, as a parent, find a way, find a place to not pay too much attention to the highs in terms of how great and wonderful they are, and too much attention to the lows in terms of how horrible or devastating it is. So that's an idea. One way to think about transition, I think a lot of people have trepidation and anxiety about transition. And my thought about it, if we're approaching it with this kind of mindset that I'm describing, then if it's good, it's good. Right? We learned something. It's valuable. We're glad to see the success. And if it's bad, it can be good. I said that backwards on the slide. Oh, no, I didn't. I said it correctly. So in other words, if something goes awry, if something happens that I think our trauma brain might say, this is a disaster. But if we can look at it and say, what can I learn from this? What can I learn about my participation? What can I learn about my reaction? What new kind of assessment do I have about my son or my daughter, right? We thought we were here and we weren't there. Was I holding on expectations instead of learning to just be curious and work with it and then learn to respond in the healthiest way possible? So it's valuable to see the value in the struggle. I think one thing I talk with my clients a lot about, my families a lot about, is this idea that we can learn to value mistakes and struggles. And I always say, I've learned some of my most important lessons in my life through my mistakes. It's not that I seek after them, but when they happen, and they're bound to happen, can I make meaning out of it? I know a lot of treatment centers will tell me, I had an owner of a treatment center last night tell me that it's not whether or not the client relapses. It's what the client does with that relapse, how they make meaning out of it. And so our learning to make meaning, our learning to value it, can be a helpful contribution to our child's recovery and to our own recovery, right? We can start to think, okay, I backslid. I overreacted. I had that same old fight with my partner. I had that same old interaction with my child. What can I do differently? What am I learning? Am I learning something from this? Like I said earlier, one way to think about this is that we're always transitioning. The critical piece of transition is it's the weakest point in any kind of structure, right? I remember when I was in woodshop. This is many, many years ago. And the only thing I was good at making was a breadboard because it was the easiest thing to make. And I remember my woodshop teacher taking a breadboard and trying to break it. And he said, if you've done a good job, you're going to break it in the middle of the piece of wood instead of at the seams. But most often it would break at the seams because that's the most vulnerable place, right? And there's an increased amount of stress for everybody during transition, right? Structures changing, newness, novelty. A lot of us struggle with change and novelty. And so if we can be kind to ourselves and to others during that, not that we relax our boundaries, right? That we compromise them, but we can have an attitude of non-judgment and of openness and of curiosity during that time. We can, again, more in a more helpful way, contribute to others and to ourselves managing transition well. I had a student years ago when he was describing his transitioning out of the program. He said, I'm leaving home to go home. Because there is a part of this that they'll carry with them. Even the ones that fought it, even the ones that oftentimes were upset about being here, pretty much all the way through, they'll take a piece of it with them because it's a safe place. And the people here care. They're not perfect, but they care. They're invested. I was just talking to an alumni tonight, and she was describing with her parents this idea that when she was out in the wilderness, that she was allowed to say how she felt, and it wasn't to be debated or argued with. But then when she does that with her brothers, this is a young adult, by the way, with young adult brothers, she said when she does that with her brothers, she struggles because it seems like her feelings aren't necessarily accepted and are up for debate and discussion, and how that's a difficult transition for her. So there's something about this place that is safe, something about this place that is liberating and free, something about this place that you can take with you. Let's talk about logistically what it looks like. Oftentimes these days we'll do a transition in the field, especially for adolescents. I'll talk about young adults in some later slides, but that can happen in the field during a day visit, during an overnight visit. Sometimes it's just a couple of hours. Sometimes it can happen in the office. Sometimes it's an unceremonious transition, meaning that you're not there. I like this particular aspect. I'm going to share something with you that I think can help a lot of people if you're still in the process, and that is this. Sometimes you need to plan in advance your visit to the field, right? And your therapist isn't accommodating, meaning that they don't quite have the assessment about the readiness of your son or daughter to leave the program. And you're following their directions, right? You're trusting them. And so, but you're battling because I have a job, I have responsibilities, I need to plan in advance. What I've said to those families, if you need to plan in advance, let's take our best guess. But let's say that you're planning on December 3rd, and then it comes to be December 3rd, and then we recognize, you know what, or the week prior, it's not the right time for him or her to leave, and you agree with that, of course. Then you come on that December 3rd visit, you spend a day in the field, and then you leave. And then your child moves to the next program in some other way. You don't have to come out again the next week or the week after that. So it's okay for there to be variations in the way that we transition our clients. And I think parents, because of their fear, because of their guilt, because of their anxiety, get very invested in a certain brand and making sure their child feels maybe validated by this way, that they get tied into it. So I just wanted to put that out there. And sometimes it's unceremonious because the child is at a place where spending time with parents during transition is not necessarily going to be helpful yet at this point. We always try to end with some ceremony in all cases, but I want to just open your mind up to that. Who should come, and I'm being very clear about this. The persons who should come are the same that are involved on the weekly family parent phone calls, right? Those are the people that should come. And typically, we don't want siblings to come. We don't want pets to come, right? Again, this is a vulnerable time. Other kinds of visitors can happen when your child has settled into their next phase of treatment, whatever that is, right? When they've stabilized there. But just to give you the default, now all Evoke therapists are going to make this call for the families, but I'm telling you, doing this for now almost 20 years, that it is very rare, very rare. It is the exception for sure that I would want anyone other than the parents or co-parents that were on the weekly phone calls. And part of that is also they're being involved in those weekly phone calls. This is a process. You learn things on those phone calls. You're involved with the parent portal. You're doing the assignments. And there are, of course, rare times when other aunts, uncles, partners, even older siblings can be a helpful part of that process. But the default is that it's just the parents or those that are parenting on those weekly phone calls. This is again another thing I say as a foundation. There are exceptions to this rule, but make it seamless. No extra time, no extra visitors, no extra detours. I've had I have story after story after story of parent and child telling me that those kinds of things became a distraction, where momentum was lost, where in some cases they didn't even make it to the next treatment program, therapeutic school, wherever. It does not typically add to it. It adds stress. Keep it simple. Don't expand a bunch of calls. Talk to your therapist about this, but expanding calls to other family members, again, let's save those for times when things are more stable. No extra activities, limited stimulus, right? Keep it family time. Keep it simple. And again, where that's going to be a slip up or a temptation for parents is where guilt comes in, right? I need to make this better. I need to make you happy, right? This boundary that I'm going to set to keep it simple. And we tell them the same thing is going to be too painful, and it's going to be some form of communication to you that says you didn't do a good job, or you didn't earn this or deserve it. This is not about earning or deserving. This is about providing the best possible care, especially when they're moving on to another therapeutic school, if that's the phase of treatment that they're in. I would say to my families for years, if they can handle a yes, that means if they can handle a yes to a request that they make, like, can I call my friend? Can I call so-and-so? Can we have an extra day together? If they can handle a yes and all that comes with it, then they can handle a no. Right? If they can't handle a no, then they're demonstrating their lack of capacity to deal with a boundary and to deal with a yes. And it's never going to be good enough. So I want to empower you. I want to give you permission to keep it simple, keep it seamless, and it's okay to say no, and this is how we're going to do it. Like I said, family time. It's okay to have movies. It's okay to let them eat some fun food that they haven't had in 2.5 months. Right? It's okay to splurge and celebrate in those ways. But keep it as quiet and simple as low key as possible. With adolescents, we encourage 100% supervision. And again, a lot of parents are going to feel awkward about that because you're walking through the airport, they go to the bathroom. I've had people ask for cigarettes. I've had people have conversations with strangers that aren't safe. I've had people borrow cell phones from strangers in the bathroom, things like that. Keep the supervision 100%. Keep it simple. Keep it clear. And you don't have to apologize for it. And you're not sending some punitive message. You're just saying, this is what I feel comfortable with. Well, don't you trust me? You know what? At this point, this is what I need to feel comfortable. And I'm sorry if you interpret it as, I don't care. I don't think you did well. I'm sorry if you interpret it that way. I'm sorry if my discomfort with letting you go out of my sight is painful for you. But I need this to feel comfortable. So keep 100% supervision on the transport with adolescents. Of course, family, parents can make this transport. You can also have a professional, and I would say 1 out of 15 cases, 15 or 20 cases, I would have a professional transport. On some occasions, I had a mixed transport where one of our field staff would go, and this is something you could contract with them separately. They would go with you to kind of be a guide, a support. They don't have supervision of your child. They can't intervene in terms of supervision, but just to keep you all on track. I've done a couple of those myself. These are, again, exceptions to the rule, but that is a possibility and something that we could make available to you. But again, they would not have custody of your child. They would not be an official transporter. You would be the transporter. They would just be a guide and a support to you. So what are the pitfalls that I've seen? Extra time. Parents and students often equate more time with happier time, and it almost never means that. It's the strangest thing. Extra calls, letting them call girlfriends or boyfriends, or people that weren't involved, or siblings even. Be very, use great discretion with that. Involving extra people, siblings, relatives, and dogs. That can be a distraction, especially with siblings, especially with people that weren't involved in the parent and family curriculum. And I'll tell you why, because we end up spending so much time attending to, teaching, catching that other person up to speed, that it really compromises the amount of attention and resources that we can give to your child and to you in this process. So although it might feel warm, although it's going to be there will be a loss, all of this comes with a loss, we find it to be a more effective treatment plan. I think perhaps the biggest pitfall that parents make during a visit or a transition and or visit is that they want it to be happy time. And when they commit or expect or hope for it to be happy time, they steer away from the opportunity to do good work. They avoid difficult subjects. They get reactive if something upsetting comes up or there's some kind of conflict. They have extraordinary disappointment. Parents that come expecting to work usually walk away feeling very enriched and satisfied with the process. Parents that come expecting just to celebrate, just to have a happy time, often come away being very disappointed and very upset. So please, if nothing else you hear, when doing the transition, when doing a field visit, come with very few attachments and come with an expectation that there's going to be some work. When there is a transition and I get a call, when I get a call from the child, the complaint often is that their parent either is setting a boundary with them or their parent is trying to talk them out of their feelings, right? I express frustration that I couldn't go home and my parent won't let me, they're trying to talk me out of it, they're trying to lecture to me. And when I get a call from a parent, the child's either violating a boundary, an expectation, or the parent is not tolerating the fact that the child is sulking a little bit. Now, I use that word not as a criticism, but they're sad. It's hard. The minute they get in the car, they're anticipating that they're about to be dropped off at a therapeutic school or program with nobody that they know there, and they're not going to see you for some weeks or some months. Of course they're going to feel sad. And so those are the complaints that I often get most from parents and from their children. Like I said, be prepared to work. What are you doing to prepare? Be prepared to work. Try to dig into issues, right? Make an attempt at it, but don't enter into it with the expectation that everything is going to be resolved. Right? You don't have to come to resolution. You can take a time out and you say, we tried to talk about this, but let's wait till our therapist gets here. Let's wait till we get to the next school and let's table this for right now. We don't need to come to resolution. So finding that balance to not avoid things, to dig into it, but not being committed to or believing that you have to resolve everything. It's like that old advice that people give at weddings. Don't go to bed mad. That's horrible advice. Do you know how many people end up in severe conflict because they need to be at peace? It's okay to take a timeout. It's okay to walk away. And sometimes that timeout is an overnight timeout. That's okay. A lot of situations would not escalate if we could learn to take a timeout. We don't want you to cram. So if you're early on in the process, please be doing the work now. Please be going to your AA, Al-Anon, codependence meetings, your webinars. Of course, you're on it tonight. Please be watching and your parent portal and doing your assignments there. Cramming is not ideal. At least watch. And if you haven't watched it since the beginning, watch the webinar on healthy communication and the webinar on 8 tools for transforming relationships. At least those, right? In fact, if you're open to it, watch one or both of those just prior to coming to transition or for a field visit. Know and practice the I feel statements. Or I skipped one. This is the real game. This is the real thing. And it's like I'm a sports fan, or you can apply it to the theater, I suppose, where you have opening night. Like dress rehearsal wasn't the same thing. Scrimmage wasn't the same thing. This is the real thing. You're going to practice. And it's an opportunity for you to see where you're at, right? It's a litmus test for you. In sports, when a team is going up against a really great team, maybe the defending champion, the coach of the team that's challenging them will say, this is an opportunity for us to see where we're at, see how far we've come, right? During an opening of a play, this is an opportunity to put everything into practice that we've had and to see what it's like for us. So be open to and curious about your own reactions, your own resolve. Know and practice the I feel statement. Again, if you don't have any other skill, know that, be introduced. You don't have to be perfect at it. We'll support you. We'll coach you. We have coaching materials out there for you. But at least be familiar with it when you come out there. Remember, in transition, the goal is point A to point B. The stuff that happens in between is grist for the therapy mill. And that's where I say if it goes well, fantastic. If it doesn't go well, fantastic. There's something you can learn. There's something that now you learn that, hey, we still have to work on this. I still have to work on this. We still have to work on this dance. I can still see you have to work on things. So that can be as helpful and part of the assessment as anything. We named it years ago. We used to do more transition camps. Now we individualize them. We named the transition camp because we wanted to emphasize that this was not a conclusion, no matter where the client or the student is going after Evoke, right? We wanted to emphasize in our language that it's a journey and that you're transitioning to the next phase of your journey. It goes along with the idea that we specifically, intentionally created a program where not a high percentage of our students would complete all the phases. In fact, in my experience, the ones who complete the air phase, the exceptional ones that do, oftentimes are still challenged with that mindset of I'm done. No matter where they're going afterwards. I'm done. I finished my work. And so we still might transition somebody to that air phase, but it's okay if they leave on water phase. And sometimes we will set up something clinically where we say we want to have them accomplish this month, and sometimes we're going to say it's okay. So it's very intentional on our part that we didn't create a program that everybody was required to complete all of it, to communicate that this is a journey and that you're never really done. The time for a visit, the time for transition is a time to evaluate the family's progress, not just the child. I think a lot of parents become obsessed with, really hyper-focused on, where is my son at? Where are they at? One of my hopes is, and I'll mention this a few times tonight, is that it will also be an opportunity for you to say, where am I at? You know, how are my triggers? How's my old behavior coming up? How am I dealing with my anxiety, my frustration, my resentment? How am I dealing with all of that? You know, at transition at the end of the program, oftentimes people still say, you know, I still want to see my boyfriend or my girlfriend, or I'm still not done with drugs. My response is, hopefully you have treatment still in place, and in many cases you are going to a therapeutic school program. So my response is, of course. I've been told not too long ago by a treatment professional who visited our program that he observed that one of the clients was saying he wasn't done with drugs and that the group wasn't challenging him on that. What I've learned is I've learned to trust that. I've learned to be open to them saying that. And of course we're going to challenge your children on all of these things. But I'm not going to be so coercive that I get them to say the right thing and not own it. So when your child's, I mean, there's another way I think about it. When a child tells me they're not going to use drugs, I don't believe them. When they tell me I'm going to use drugs, I don't believe them. Right? Meaning that it doesn't matter. Today matters. How are you doing right now? I can see everything I need to see about you from what you're doing out here in the program, from what you're doing in this transition session with your parents, from what you're talking about. That tells me more than any specific content of the words. And that's why when people memorize therapeutic language or 12-step language, I don't necessarily get impressed by that, right? It's not hard stuff to memorize. What I get impressed by, what I pay attention to is what you're doing. So take a step back from all of that. If your child's coming home, there's greater challenges, right? You have hopefully things in place. If they're going to a therapeutic school, that's why they're going to a therapeutic school, because they're not ready. Therapeutic program or school. So it's okay if you take a step back from it. A lot of parents will think, I thought we had settled that. And you know what? You did with letters and on phone calls. But there's this process that children go through. When I say children, I mean young adults or adolescents, that they're going to still test your resolve. It's not a conscious thing, right? But it's like, are you sure? I want to see how you react. I want to have the real-time conversation about this stuff to see if you're as committed, as resolved, as clear, to see if you have that boundary, to see if you're serious about that. And so prepare yourself that things that you thought were settled in letters and on phone calls come up again. You get ready for that and you're in a great spot. I used to say to all of my adolescent boys and girls, make your parents sad to drop you off, not relieved. You know, I would pull them aside and I would say, you know more than they do clinically. You do. You have more skills, more training than your parents do in almost all cases, right? You're more technically trained in this process. You don't have necessarily the maturity of your parents and the discipline, but you have a skill set. And you can use it. You can make of it what you want. And yes, you might be able to upset your parents. Yes, you might be able to trigger them. Yes, you might be able to create some anxiety or frustration or anger or even hurt in them. But the ideal is that they're sad to drop you off, not relieved to drop you off. Make them wonder, I would say, does this kid really need more treatment? He seems so grounded. and so capable of responding to my boundaries and responding to his upsetness or her upsetness or sadness in the healthiest way. And no matter what, it'll hurt to drop your child off. It'll hurt to some degree. There'll be a loss. I remember when I dropped my son off, I was crying so hard when I dropped my son off at his therapeutic school after Wilderness that I felt like there was pressure behind my eyes and they were going to pop out of my head. And my son finally said to me after I was crying so hard, he said, "It'll be okay, Dad." I've been with all kinds of students during the transition and watched how, as it led up to it, everybody got more and more anxious. Old patterns tended to reemerge, and it was a painful and difficult separation. So prepare yourself for that. Expectations are a huge predictor of how satisfying the experience is in this and a lot of other experiences. All right, talking about the near future. Experience some adjustment, some growing pains, and some regression. I always talk about the juggling analogy. At Evoke, your children, young adult and adolescent, have learned how to juggle 3 balls really well. And then they're going to get in this bigger box, right? They're going to get handed a couple of more balls. And juggling 5 balls, for those of you who know how to juggle, and I know how to juggle 3 balls, juggling 5 balls means you're a professional. Juggling 3 balls is something you can do. It's not the same animal. And you'll drop all the balls. Does that mean that you forgot how to juggle? Of course not. You just have more things to manage, more variables, more pressures, more influences, more exposure, more tasks, more responsibilities, even more freedom in some ways than in wilderness therapy. Less clinical support than in wilderness therapy. So the juggling analogy can help you remember that regression is evidence of increased stress, of more exposure. And again, wilderness therapy is amazing. It's an amazing place to get started, get an assessment, right? Really taste that spiritual and emotional and psychological birth. But then the box gets bigger. And that's harder, not easier. And most adolescents and young adults, and sometimes older adults, make the mistake of thinking that the bigger box is easier. It's not. Or we wouldn't be successful, and high schools wouldn't be such a mess, right? School is, or in the case of young adults, it can be work, but it can also be school. That gets introduced, and that is a stressor. In and of itself, it's a huge stressor, and all that comes along with school. So that's a big ball to be added to the equation. The emotional safety in wilderness is amazing. And therapeutic schools and programs afterwards are more like life, right? You interact with more people. You have more contact with oftentimes outside people, family members, less supervised. Like I said lower down on the list, less insulated. You know, your child in wilderness, they go 3 or 4 weeks without talking to you. That's because we're trying to get a foundation, right? Trying to get a start. And in therapeutic schools, you often have unsupervised phone calls. And your children, oftentimes, today's therapeutic schools and programs, there's a lot of off-campus, off-site activities to get them involved in the community. And expect for those to be challenging for them, to be triggering for them. Expect those interactions, that exposure to be difficult for them. And again, as staff, in wilderness therapy, the staff are there for 8 days in a row. The groups they're open groups, but the transition isn't overnight. And oftentimes at therapeutic schools, there's a lot more people present. The staff shifts are more like typical shifts, a typical job where they're 8 hours or 10-hour shifts. And that's not as emotionally safe and stable, but it's more like life. And you're balancing therapy with the other spheres of life, whereas in wilderness therapy, there's a greater emphasis on therapy than the other spheres of life. It's less individually focused, right? It's more of a system, right? In wilderness therapy, when a child gets upset, we stop everything and start to do therapy. We start to try to create generalizations as they move along, and they get better and stronger at it, right? They can manage themselves longer in between spontaneous groups, but as they move on to therapeutic schools and programs and society and culture, they're absolutely going to have less individual attention, less clinical support. And because of all of this, it's a slower pace of change. And so some of you have been thrilled with, excited about, have experienced a really dynamic growth curve in your children at Wilderness. From week 1 to week 6 is dramatic. Well, guess what? Week 1 to week 6 at a therapeutic school or program is not that dramatic often. It's more like month 1 to month 6. But that's why it's important. It's important to have both, ideally, if we can. Right? There are benefits to both. And we want your children to stumble and fall and pick themselves up in these schools and programs. But expect a slower pace of change. Less insulation, right? You're going to hear a more unfiltered version of your child because it's not coming through the therapist for the first month like it is in Wilderness, right? You're going to have more letters, more reports, sometimes more contact that is unsupervised. There is a different level of customer service. That's something that those of you who have been through it know already, but I want to prepare you who are moving in that direction. We at Evoke provide an incredibly high level of customer service and support. These webinars, the 230 plus webinars that we have, the parent mentor, the parent portal, the parent coordinator, the therapist phone calls, all those things. That's a lot of clinical support, the parent groups, all those things. And I want you to be prepared for and know that it's different. We are a very acute starting point for our clients, for our families. And so it requires this level of support, level of customer service. It's going to be looser and broader and more spread apart as you move on. The letter or phone call you can expect, I'm telling you now because you're going to get a letter a month in, month and a half in, 2 months in that says, this is the wrong place, this is the wrong people, I can do it at home, I like Wilderness better, let me try it at home. These people are not the same, not safe, not my people. I'm saying that in advance and breathe through that. Talk to your contact, your point of contact, whether it be therapist or whoever you communicate with at the program. Make yourself comfortable, but don't make rash decisions and prepare yourself for that. That's this kind of dip after the honeymoon that our clients and students often experience. I want to talk just a moment about coming home because I didn't have this in the original. It was its own webinar. Still is. But coming home presents its own challenges. That can be a transition. And that can be coming home after Wilderness or coming home after a therapeutic school or program. Go to your meetings starting now. Don't wait for meetings and therapy to when your child comes home. Start as early as you can, yesterday, if you're new to this process. Start with your meetings. Start with your therapy. Start learning to take risks in this process, to put yourself out there, to be vulnerable, to be open to learning. You don't have to get it right. When we get you on the phone or we coach you in a letter, it's not about getting in trouble or getting it right or wrong. Put yourself out there and then allow us to coach you, right? Allow us to direct you. Allow your therapist, allow other people to help you. Really work on co-participation with your co-parent. Really work on co-participation or codependency with your child. Look at your part. How am I co-participating in the issues in a healthy way or unhealthy way? What's my codependency look like? Can I put the emphasis of my focus on me, not on them? It's still going to be on them. I'm still going to pay attention. Still going to make decisions based on what they do. But my energy is going to be focused on what I can control, what's inside of my control, and me. And I'm not going to make the identified patient my complete field, a vision of energy. I'm going to make myself a co-participant in this. Pay attention to guilt and shame. Right? Do work around that. Understand that guilt and shame is an incredible restrictor for parents. And it is not an effective way to parent our children. Simply put, we often have been taught that guilt and shame is a way to modify behavior, and it's one of the most destructive influences in all of our lives, in getting healthier, in doing well. The hardest part of guilt and shame is that in the immediate, it can be very effective at moderating behavior. And in the long term, it is the cancer of the mental health world. Developing response flexibility, not becoming reactive and having a trauma response, right? The more work that you can do, the more awareness that you can build around your own context, your own history, your own issues, all of that, the more likely you are able to respond flexibly to your child versus a knee-jerk, hot reaction. And then embrace the journey. Embrace it as a journey. I've told the story about a grandfather in a small parent group talking about his excitement about where his granddaughter was. And then everybody else in the group said, we were there too, and now we're here, and it's a little bit more level up. And he said, oh my gosh, you burst my bubble. And all the rest of the parents jumped in and said, no, no, it's okay. You're doing the right thing. Just hang in there. He said, no, no, no. You burst my bubble, and I'm glad that you did. I needed it burst because I needed to remember at this high moment that it's still a journey, right? You meet your goal diet weight, and if that's all you're thinking about is just that diet goal weight, what's going to happen? You're going to regress. If you think, I need to adopt a healthier relationship with food and with exercise, with my body, you stand a chance of sustaining that throughout your life. And walking slowly is this idea that there's no destination, right? It's this idea that why would we walk fast? Because we're already there. We have the possibility of happiness and peace and serenity in the present moment. And happiness isn't out there in front of us. There are rich opportunities. And if we are paying too much attention to the future, we're not only going to be more anxious, but we're going to miss the opportunity to embrace the gifts of today. All right. To the students and clients, I say this. Be careful of weaponizing your skills. Students, myself included, are great at weaponizing I feel statements, weaponizing their skill. Be aware of your capacity to manipulate. Own it. Talk about it. What are you trying to do? Get the other person to change. Oftentimes, students don't want to use the skills. I learned the I feel statement, I want to use it. Right? This is something there are wonderful, important, healthy, rich principles beneath all the skills. Use your therapist to help you. I always say to my clients, your therapist can be your advocate. If you're doing your work, doesn't mean you have to be perfect, but if you're doing your work, you have the better chance of your therapist helping you with your parents. I just had an interaction with a daughter and parents tonight, and she did exactly that. I need help with them. Can you help me? What do I need? Help me first, and then help me to talk to them. Expecting your parents to change, it's up to you. I say the same thing to parents. It's going to be later on in the webinar. Everybody would be best served in the family to not really pay a lot of attention to how much change the other person is making, and expect that nobody else in the family is going to do that much different. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do when your dad yells at you, your mom yells at you? What are you going to do when they don't listen to you? What are you going to do when they use shame and guilt? When they try to dismiss your feelings? On and on and on. What are you going to do? How are you going to do? I'm not saying don't be upset and don't be frustrated or hurt by it, but I'm saying it's ultimately your responsibility to figure out how to cope with that, how to deal with that, and how to develop resources and accommodations and support to be able to deal with that. Oftentimes, one of the biggest mistakes that the students and clients make is that context doesn't matter. They think they can overcome their context. I can walk into a bar still. I can hang around my old playmates, my old playgrounds, right? I can lift them up to where I'm at. That's an incredible overestimation of your own capacity and your lack of vulnerability, and a huge underestimation of how powerful our contexts are. So that's one thing I try to get my clients to look at more realistically. And then black and white thinking. Black and white thinking is one of the most destructive forces for all of us. Either or, all or nothing. You always say this. You never do this. It's always this way. So steer away from that. Parents usually stumble because they think that they're in charge of making their children feel something, and painful or uncomfortable feelings need a solution, and they don't. They're just okay. And if your child learns that their feelings aren't okay, that they aren't okay, in essence, it's going to be a hard road for them. Parents often want their kids to get it, right? We try to talk them into it. We try to explain it into it, lecture it into them, try to motivate them instead of just saying, here's my boundary, here's my limit. And I'm willing to talk to you. I'd love to talk to you, but I don't need you to like it or get it or agree with me for me to have my boundary. I'm going to learn to start to speak from a place of saying, this is what I need to feel comfortable. Parents often expect it to be easy, especially because they've seen their children do so well, and because the distance, the time away from each other has been in many ways rewarding and healing. That's where I go back to expect it to be work. Expect it to be a challenge. Black and white thinking again. The research tells us that black and white thinking is one of the greatest barriers to parents assessing their process as satisfying, as a happy outcome in terms of the therapeutic placement. So really try to work on that extreme, catastrophizing, exaggerated, black and white, either or polarized thinking. Parents think we've arrived, right? Instead of adopting this, I need to have a healthier relationship with life, right? I need to change my lifestyle versus just find a solution. Parents oftentimes try to be detectives, right? And they ask themselves this question: was my child telling me the truth in wilderness or in therapeutic school? And my response is, they might believe it. They could maybe pass a lie detector test. What you're really wondering is, does it have legs? And the only way you're going to find that out is when it happens. So it's not that they were lying or not lying. I've even heard clients and students go back and say, I BS'd my way through, or I lied. And I've said to some of mine, no, you did not. You're saying that now because you've stumbled, and now you want to say you're being honest now, but you absolutely believed it. You overestimated yourself. You underestimated the challenge. And now you want to call what you were doing before a lie. It was just a lack of awareness. It was just ignorance. And that's okay. Now you know. Now you're not ignorant. Now you have wisdom. So it's not about honesty, oftentimes. It's about the capacity. I can say at the beginning of the day, I honestly want to eat healthy, and then something happens in the day where I get triggered and I fall back. Does that mean I was dishonest? No, it didn't mean I was dishonest when I woke up this morning. It meant that I wasn't as aware of myself as I could be. And then parents' biggest pitfall often is focusing on what they can't control, changing the kids so they feel better instead of making yourself, your serenity, your project. All right, a couple things about young adults. The transition can be a rite of passage, right? We oftentimes want them to own it and want them to travel by themselves. Your therapist will talk to you about that. Your child's therapist will talk to you about that. But that's one different. We're going to lean toward that more for young adults than we are for adolescents, by far. Transitioning to life's challenges that come with being a young adult include college, work, relationships, temptations, and moving towards independent living, right? So we're asking for ownership. It can also happen with transport, with a sober companion. It can also happen with a parent. But I want you to hear that it's more likely you're going to hear that suggestion if you have a young adult with us. In finding value in them doing it by themselves. Client has a goodbye ceremony in the group out in the field with their peers before leaving, so there's still ceremony and intention with the transition. So it's much more likely, if you have a young adult child, that we're going to invite you to come out to the field and to leave, and then to have your young adult child go to the program by themselves or with a sober companion or with somebody else. And then again, prepare for regression, just like with the adolescents, right? Watch for it. Be open to what it can teach you about your child and about yourself. Come ready to work. Most important thing, come ready to work. Come ready to life to work, right? Focus on the journey. Embrace it as a journey, not a destination, not someplace where you arrive. Focus more on your work than on theirs. And this is the real thing. This is an opportunity for you to assess. This is a litmus test for your resolve and your reaction to them. I love it when parents call me and say, this is what happened, but the key thing is I responded differently. I was happy with myself because in the old days I would have responded this way, and now I learned to respond this way. I love those discussions, much more so than when a parent calls me and starts detailing every single thing their child did or didn't do. Right? If they're not in the equation of that conversation, that follow-up call, then I have a sense that they're missing a focus, an importance. Watch for everything to be grist for the mill, right? That's ideally a principle that we can adopt in all of this process, is become more curious and less terrified by or devastated by or enraptured by what our children do. Just watch and pay attention, be curious about what it means and what's going forward. How's it gonna help us? Evaluation, transition is an opportunity to evaluate the family's progress, not just the child. One of the things that your children need from you is to get out of the role of the identified patient. Make the whole family. The identified patient is just this idea that the child with the symptoms is the one, he or she is holding the symptoms for a family system that has problems, dysfunction in it. And that thought that parents have that says, why do I need therapy? Why do I need support? It's not my problem. That again is going to get in the way of family healing. Like I said, expect nobody else in the family to change than you. And by the way, when you adopt this idea that nobody, I'm not gonna be obsessed with other people's change. I'm gonna be focused on my change. You are so much more impactful. You are so much. You have so much of a better, more healthy, more positive contribution to your child. So ironically, you become a greater resource to your child. And then remember and be open to the process can happen with or without you, and it can happen in a variety of ways. And be open to that, what it means, what the intention behind it is, and so forth. All right, live questions that are topic related, Michael. Ready to take those if there are any? You stated 100% supervision. What about the 21-year-old going to aftercare on his own? Should I be concerned? They are going to Bend, Oregon on a plane with layovers in Salt Lake City and Portland. We visited the field in the field in October. Young adults are a little bit different, right? And again, follow your therapist's recommendation. We're much more likely to suggest that because they're going to be in a situation most likely that's a sober living where they're going to be out in the community. So it's okay for them to do that. I was speaking more to adolescents, and like I said, you probably asked that question before I got to the young adult part, but we're much more likely to recommend this kind of thing and just simply ask your therapist, are you comfortable with this? And by the way, comfortable with it doesn't mean I guarantee that nothing's going to go bad. It means that he or she is ready for that test, and then we're going to watch them. We're going to see how they pass that test, and then we're going to make meaning out of that. We're going to learn from that, one way or the other. My son is leaving next week. I'm very anxious and nervous for the 24 hours of time together to the therapeutic boarding school. I'm worried about new communication skills. What is your most important point for this transition time? Again, you probably asked that early on, but look at the 8 tools. Look at the communication, the 8 tools. In fact, print up, go to our blog and look at the 8 tools that I wrote 5 or 6 weeks ago, blog, and print that up and read that. Those are the most important and basic things. Know what each of those mean. And look at the webinar if you haven't always looked at that. Those are my 8 most basic things that I think if we practice those skills and those tools, they're simple, but they can help us transform our relationship. And then again, part of what I can help with your anxiety is to say it's okay if it is a struggle. It's okay if it flops on its face, then you can still be okay and your child still can be okay and you can pick yourselves up and you can make meaning of that and that can become rich material going forward. And hopefully you can make that adjustment. Hopefully you can begin to look at it through that lens instead of having to go perfect and right and good. And again, dealing with the trauma, the real trauma that you have in your past and the way that things have gone, even if it goes really poorly. And I've had students run away. It's the exception to the rule. I've had them refuse to get out of the car. It's by far the exception to the rule. Those are by far the exceptions to the rule. But it wasn't a disaster. It was tough. It was painful. And in almost every case, and that's only a handful of the ones that I've had, it ended up being something really valuable. In fact, some of the most difficult ones, parents will say to me years later, the students will say to me years later, that was the most important part of my treatment. That big flop on my face. And then come ready to work. Come ready to work. And then third, don't expect anybody to change except for yourself. Focus on yourself. I've only found SLE, that's a sober living environment, aftercare for my young adult that allows smoking cigarettes. I find this unacceptable as part of the aftercare process in healthy living. Is there a way to find an aftercare option that would prohibit cigarettes? I understand where you're coming from. It's not going to be the case most likely for sober living. It is, it is one of those things that they're going to tell you in this field, you're going to have to lose the battle to win a war, right? And so, although I don't smoke, I don't want my children to smoke. This is one of those things for a young adult, because it's legal, that people are going to invite you to let go of that and simply to express how you feel and then to let it go. So I wish I had other options. And I think it's one of the strange ironies of drug abuse, drug dependence treatment, that the amount of caffeine in cigarettes is prolific in these meetings. And it's one of those things where you're not gonna die on that hill. Not right now. It's something that they can make progress for in the future. So What happens if the child connects to one parent but not the other? I didn't talk about that. I should have talked about different parents. Be very thoughtful with your therapist about who comes, and if one of you wants to come. Sometimes I'll have a parent come one time the week before, and then another parent makes transition. Sometimes a parent, so there's opportunities, and you get to decide that if you have joint custody, but your therapist can kind of guide that, and they're not going to make the decision for you. But there could be an opportunity to focus on, to be curious about that. I wonder why. And if I'm the parent they're not connecting with, I'm going to feel hurt, most likely. I'm going to feel a little bit alienated, maybe. But I'm going to say, what can I do? I might ask my child, it sounds like, it feels like you're a little bit different. Is there anything I'm doing? What can I do to be more helpful? What am I doing that doesn't feel safe to you? Right? If I can be open in those ways with my child, I'm beginning to build the bridge. And I also have to be extremely, you can't force it. I have to be patient. It has to come on their terms. So get support from your home therapist. Get support from your Evoke therapist. Be intentional about the visit. Maybe coming at separate times is valuable. And then starting to build bridges of communication with the child and understanding and being curious about what that's about. And if that's about unhealthy parenting, that's a whole different discussion. That's going to take co-parenting therapy at home and some work on each of your parts. You can watch the webinar on co-parenting that I did where I talk most importantly about don't make the other parent's pathology your obsession, right? Just focus on you, stay on your side of the street. And don't polarize. Don't compensate for them. So you become the super, super lax one because the other one's super rigid, or you become the super, super rigid one because the other person is too lax. Or you become overly gushingly, emotionally sappy because the other person is cold, or vice versa. You know what I mean. All right, folks. Thank you for the webinar. Thank you for the questions. A couple events coming up. This is all I have. December 10th through the 13th. I have one scholarship spot left for that. So if you're on this webinar, you want to come, you have to get yourself out there, and we're offering a scholarship spot for the Finding You Intensive next Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Starts at Thursday at 2. You can email intensives@evoketherapy.com for more questions. I think there are a couple of people exploring it right now, so that might be taken up. But if you're interested, let us know. You can go to our website to look at our pursuits trip. This is for families and young adults. You can do them as a family. You can do them. You can have your young adult come for sober fun. Wonderful adventure experiences. We want you to go to 6 of these meetings while your child is with us. We would like you to experiment with them, to try them on for size. And don't just go once or twice, but go at least 6 times. Any version, any combination of those. And they're not all the same. And not all AA meetings, not all Al-Anon meetings, not all CODA meetings are the same. So try different ones. And then talk to people at the meetings and say, is there another one that you like? Follow us on social media. I'm more aware of the value of following us on social media if you're on social media because of these. I announced the scholarship online, so check that out. And then the blog. Also, you can go to drbradreedy.com because somebody asked me today to announce that because I put some blogs that I don't put on Evoke on drbradreedy.com, and I'm going to be doing separate webinars that are more general, a little bit farther out there, if you will, starting in 2016. So go to drbradreedy.com for other blogs. I just posted one today, and I have some other ones on there that aren't on the Evoke site. You can go to barnesandnoble.com. They're out of stock on Amazon.com, so don't go to Amazon.com right now for the book. Go to barnesandnoble.com. You can go to our Parent Alumni Foundation book page. All right, the next webinar, I'm going to be out of town all next week doing the intensive the second half of the week and out in back east the first part of the week, so I won't have any time for webinars next week, and it'll be the following week, and we'll let you know when that is and what the topic will be. So take this time to look at archive webinars and to look at some of the ones that I mentioned, some of the ones that we list here. These 2 slides that are on every webinars. If you haven't seen all of these, this could be the week to spend some time watching these. You can go to any of the recent webinars and click on the slides on the parent portal, and it will have all of our slides to all the webinars, and you can look at those. All right, folks, I hope this point of contact is helpful to you. Have a great week. I'll talk to you when I get back. Take care. Bye-bye.